Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Ascend for Business, where we discuss trending and overlooked business topics. I'm your host, Christine, business communications professional and veteran support aficionado. In this episode, we'll be discussing self-advocacy in the workplace and mental health in the workplace. With us today, we have Dr. Destinee Prete, IO psychology consultant and wearer of many hats. In the interest of correctness, I will let Destinee take over from here and introduce herself.
I appreciate that. Well, thanks for having me. So yes, aware of many hats for sure. My ultimate favorite hat to wear is my Wonder Woman tiara. So, and I'm just kidding. IO psychology. People are like, what in the world is that? So industrial and organizational psychology is the field that I work in. And basically, it's the study of human behavior in the workplace. And it's the easiest way to say that we study a lot of really cool things. We apply a lot of principles of evidence and research, and we, create different kinds of measures and metrics to those things. So we try to really create interventions that give statistics and use best practices and research. So just a nice fancy way of saying a really good consultant. But additionally, I am a business owner. I own an organization called PG Strategies Group, which is the business side of the house for me. I also have a nonprofit, which is what you see here in the background behind me. It's called We2AreVets. It's a nonprofit focused on honoring, empowering, and recognizing women veterans. And I've been military connected my entire life. So my mom, brother, dad, myself, my husband have all either served or are currently serving in the military, all Army. So go Army. I will not I like banter. So if we get into the different services, I'm okay with that. But we are a very Army strong family. And so post-service, I've also been very connected in the military and veteran space, not only through the nonprofit work, but I've worked a lot of jobs in the military. So because of that, I now do a lot of advocacy, and I'm on different committees and on different boards for organizations that talk about connecting the field of IO psychology and the veteran and military communities alike. So that's the purpose of the many hats that I wear.
Yeah, absolutely. That's quite a lot you have going on. And you kind of touched on this a little bit. You said you're military connected your whole life, essentially. And so I was going to ask you, tell me why you do what you do, but you kind of touched on it a little bit. Would you like to expand on that at all?
Sure. I mean, so ultimately, once again, the military has been threaded through my whole life, right? So kind of grew up in it and exposed to it. And then whenever I went into the military myself, thinking that I might spend, my whole career doing it, instead, I got pregnant with twins very fast when I got in the military. And then I got pregnant with my third. So right after, so I had 3 kids in a very short period of time and was trying to do, full-blown military career with my husband active duty. And he was on the deployment schedule. We were both at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And at the time, it was just like so much deployment and tempo. And knowing that I was having 3 babies and not sure how that was going to work with 2 of us in, decided to get out. And it was the transition itself that I look back and realize that's really where the source of like all this passion has come from. I talk about it a lot, but I really believe in service beyond the uniform. I actually feel like I've been a lot more connected to community after I left the service. And so I started my doctorate program the same day that I decided to leave the military, and people thought I was crazy because I was leaving with, 3 little babies and starting my doctorate and leaving the military. But what I was able to do during my PhD program was actually research the military community. And so I started researching the veteran transition space. And at the same time, I was working in it. And it was through all of those experiences, I also became a certified veteran developmental coach. And so I was able to connect all of these professional things with personal things and then get really heavy into the research. And that's where all the connections were made. And I did my dissertation on the post 9/11 female veteran transition experience. That's a mouthful, for the military to civilian workforce. And it was really the words of those women that stuck with me so much that I felt almost an obligation to do something about the words that they were saying to me. And so that's where the nonprofit work came from. And then that's where the true passion and advocacy started to like really source from. And so it's just kind of springboarded me into like this very interesting and unique and like very purposeful place in this field. And like, I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm really excited to be like where I am now professionally and academically.
I can hear the passion in you speaking. I've got literal goosebumps because I can
good.
tell like how passionate you are.
I have a lot of conviction with by which I say these things, because it really like, it's interesting that people don't see the connection sometimes, even in our field. Our field is very like, but like I was psychology actually sourced from the military. So like, it's interesting that we don't see the connections all the time, but we can learn so much from the workforce, from the military, and we can learn so much about the military from the workforce. So like, we just got to get better. I mean, the military is truly representative of like our population in America, you know, through different layers of identity, you know, ethnic background, you know, all those things are very representative. And we can use that to like really understand a lot of these things that we're talking about in our fields and in the workplace. So that's why I'm very passionate. It's like connection. There's so much here.
Yeah. So what was one of the like main things that you found throughout that dissertation? And since you've been out and working in it now, what is something that you would like to share from what you found?
Yeah. So what's interesting is like, so the dissertation itself, the experience was really interesting because it was a qualitative inquiry. So basically, I did semi-structured interviews, and, you know, I had to kind of conduct recruiting and outreach to get people to sign up to do them. They had to be willing to participate. And I got a lot of responses very quickly because I have a very strong network of people that, you know, believe in the same things that I do and want to be heard and, you know, want to talk about these things. So that was the first thing that was really exciting, was that there was people, and especially women, that wanted to be heard. The second part that was really interesting and exciting was that I got reached out to by women from 4 different services. So Army, Air Force, Marine, and the Navy. And then we didn't have anyone from the Coast Guard that reached out, but 4 services. And then across different ranks. So we had everything from like a low enlisted to like a senior officer. And we also, so if you think about that, the ages were different, their situations were different, but yet, though they were so spread across services and ages and ranks, they all had 4 themes like in common, which is really interesting because it showcases that experiences, though individually unique, are threaded by what people go through when they go through these kinds of things. So that veteran transition experience that they all went through, 4 themes came out. One was recognition. You know, a lot of women didn't feel like that they were being seen when they got out of the military as veterans. Even when they were in the military, they weren't being recognized. Empowerment and strength. So that was sourced through their identity shift. So identity shift was the other one, where they felt very strong and empowered and strong in uniform. And then when they left, they kind of felt like when they left, they took the uniform off, they felt, you know, kind of invisible and not seen and not strong and not powerful, although one could argue that they were incredibly powerful, right? Because of all of the things they learned and gained. So that was another one. And then another one was the transition assistance program and the need for reformation, because there were so many things that came out. It was overwhelming. It was catered to men. So all of these things that, once again, they were all different experiences and ranks, but they were all experiencing the same kinds of feelings with this. So I just thought that was so interesting that no matter what their background was, no matter what they experienced in the military, that their transition experience had a shared feeling overall. And so even though if their outcomes were different than each other, maybe some got jobs and some didn't, there was even a few that left in the military pregnant, and they shared a similar experience as those who weren't. And so what does that showcase about our community? That there are lessons to be learned from each other's experiences, right? So all of these things that are out there, these resources that are out there where people feel very lonely and they feel on their own, like we need to talk about those resources. We need to talk about those outlets. We need to talk about those things, because what people are going through is shared, even though it feels very isolating and alone. So it was really like nice to have research that showcased that, because research is truly the foundation for change, right? If you want things to change, it's got to be shown. Like people are like, show me the numbers, show me where it is. And it's like, it's here. So let's do something about it. So that was the best part of the dissertation process for me and that journey.
Yeah, that is, I want to say powerful. That what kept coming to mind was like, wow, this information is really powerful. It is very interesting to see how even with all those differences in demographics that they still came out with those same, what you said, threads and feelings.
Right.
So what's the practical application here? What can people do? What are some of the changes that we could implement?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, right? So one, I think one of the biggest challenges that service members who are transitioning and veterans who are out there, are facing is that sense of community and belongingness, right? That feeling of like, hey, like what's out there, who's out there. The military, you're a team, you're team focused, and then whenever you leave, you suddenly become, you shed that skin almost, right? You're forced to. Now you're a person. You have a first name. You have an identity. Like you're not really sure who you are, what you like, because you've been kind of like running in the same circles for so long. So to know that there's a community of people that have had that experience out there, that are doing it, that are making it, that are like okay, is really, really powerful in itself. So that's the first thing, is knowing that like there's community. And how do you find that? Like some people are isolated in like location. Some people are like not on the internet. So, but that's the other part of this, is that there's so many resources out there, right? There's, I don't know the number now. It changes, I feel like, all the time, but there's several thousands of VSOs, veteran service organizations, that are out there that can like really fill the gaps of where these programs that you leave, during cannot fill. So there's resources and things out there that so many should be taking advantage of, but they just don't know. And there's nothing more frustrating than knowing that there are things out there that can help you, but not knowing how to get to those things. Like the accessibility of those things is incredibly important. So the more we talk about these things, just like this, like having these conversations, hosting different forums, showing up in networking events and talking about what's out there is so important. So when people are like, I'm not really sure how to help, share, like talk about it. And that's where like the self-advocacy comes into all of this too. So self-advocacy is, the ability to basically convey or communicate or assert or negotiate your needs, your rights, and your desires, right? So if you need something, if you want something, if you're looking for something, knowing how to ask or knowing where to go to ask is part of that self-advocacy process that I think is so important. It's kind of that missing little token area that we don't talk about a lot, but we know we have to do, especially in our women veteran community. But this can be applicable across the entire, all humans, all people, like it doesn't matter gender or anything. But for women in particular, self-advocacy is such an important part of this piece. It's like ask for what you need or know how to go about doing that.
I'm stuck on the knowledge aspect, knowing how to do the self-advocacy and knowing how to act there, because there's the knowledge aspect, like, is it something that you learned? Is it something that you experienced and then gained knowledge? Is it something that someone taught you? And then if you do have the knowledge, let's say you're someone who's afraid of confrontation or being assertive, or you don't want to get told no. There's all these other things that people start to have feelings about when it comes to that self-advocacy. What's your response to those types of things?
Yeah, I mean, think about where you have to stop and ask yourself, like, how did I get where I am today? Right? There had to be levels of self-advocacy along the way, right? Whether you asked for something, you asserted yourself in a certain way, especially if you went to the military, like if we're talking about the military community in particular, you definitely have, had some, say in that process. Now, when you got to the military, it's likely that some of that felt like it was taken from you, right? That ability to assert yourself, that ability to communicate what you need when you need it. But there are definitely different ways to do that, into like, it's really it's a lot of self-assurance and confidence that's built into this metric, or these, not this metric, but this way of communicating out there. So, for example, I recently did a self-advocacy and equity workshop with a bunch of women who were in the military and outside of the military. So there were some veterans, there were some active duty women, and it was really interesting, the different kinds of ways that they thought about self-advocacy, right? And like some of the fears they had, just like you mentioned with that, like, how do I do it? I don't really know where to go. So one of the frameworks that I kind of gave them was this framework of empower, EMPOWER. E, express yourself. M, make your goals clear. P, practice your assertiveness. Practice your assertiveness, right? Not say go be assertive all the time, but practice it, because it's a skill that you can gain. O, own your strengths and weaknesses. W, work on your communication skills. E, engage with your support network. And R, request what you need and want. And I know there's so much negative connotation at times with the idea of, especially in women, being assertive or, asking for what you want. But in order for us to really be fair to ourselves and to get ourselves to the next level with whatever it is we want, you have to be a self-advocate. If you need something, for example, accommodations. Let's talk about disabled veterans and accommodations. I worked as a transition coordinator for wounded warriors. And one of the hardest things for many of them to do is ask for accommodations. And accommodations, for some people feel like it's a sign of weakness, right? A weakness to other people, their perception that they're going to look like they're less than. But I truly believe and know that accommodations means that you are just asking for something to level the playing field, right? You're not saying like, I want to get ahead. You're saying, hey, in order for this to be most equitable, create the most equitable possible foundation, this is the accommodation that I need. So that's self-advocating. That's understanding what you need and knowing how to ask or request those things to get you to the level playing field. So if you think of it that way, it makes it feel a lot less icky for some, because they're like, oh, I don't want to go out there and assert myself all the time. But how do you level the playing field for whatever situation you're in? That's the question. And then through self-advocacy, how do you then get to that level playing field and then use it as a springboard to get what you are looking for, right? So, because we're all looking for something, we all have goals, right? So I think it's just important to think of it and through that lens, because for some, it can feel like a very weird and uncomfortable and icky concept.
Absolutely. I'm a veteran myself, and I've worked in the veteran community and space for many years, and have continuously and still to this day run into veterans who they don't want to file a claim because they don't want the stigma that comes with that at work. It's like, first off, work's not going to know unless you tell them. But secondly, there's not anything wrong with filing a claim.
Yes.
You served, you deployed, or you didn't deploy, but you still got injured. Something still happened to you. And this is the VA's way of trying, we can't always, but trying to do something about it.
Yeah.
Or
and then think about the implication if you don't ask for what you need sometimes. Do you know how much harder things will have to be for you and for everyone else around you? Do you know how much you're going to suffer internally? Your mental health will take a toll. Your physical body will take a toll. People around you might have to pick up the slack. And so if you're one of those people who are worried about it, think about all of the outside implications from you, right? So if you just think of it objectively, how will your work suffer? Question mark. How might your productivity suffer? Question mark. And so if you think of it that way, very objectively, then it makes it a little bit easier to see it in a way where it's okay, maybe I can do this in order to make sure that those things don't happen. So it's and I talk about this through a lens of also asking yourself personal assessment questions. It's the IO psychology to me, the psychologist in me is all right, how do you think about these things? How do you do a self-check? Ask yourself questions such as can you describe a time when you had to advocate for yourself in the workplace? What strategies did you use? I'm sure all of us here that are listening can think of a time where we wanted to or had to ask for something in the workplace or had to advocate for something for ourselves, right?
Right.
So
It could be as simple as like asking for the day off or
yeah,
asking for something to be added to the company. Yeah.
yeah, it's something simple, right? But we like, as humans, we naturally take this to like the nth degree. We're like, oh, like, does this mean that I have to like, have my badge of my name and what I need and like what I have and like my challenges? No, this means like, just like that, like, what are your priorities? Why are those your priorities? My priority is my family and flexibility. Why is that my priority? Because I need flexibility for my health and my family and all that. So asking for those things that, like, once again, level the playing field for myself, are not icky or inappropriate. There's a time and a place for them, for sure. And that's where the assertive part comes in. There's so much negative stuff, once again, associated with being assertive, right? Like I always joke, but this is the truth. The first job I ever had in the military, I was a brand new lieutenant and I was supposed to go be a platoon leader. And then I kind of got like, I had to interview with the battalion or the brigade commander because it was part of like, the new and lieutenants here in processing checklist. All right. So that was the first thing I had to do. And through that interview process with the brigade commander, I ended up being, I call it stuck. I ended up getting stuck as the basically the adjutant or the aide, or there was a million names for it, but it was a job that I didn't necessarily want and I wasn't prepared to do, but I did it, right? And one of the first things he ever said to me was that I was very professionally assertive. And when he said that to me, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. And I did ask him, I literally looked at him dead in the face and I said, is that your way of calling me a professional bitch? Question. He said, no, it means that you know how to ask at the right time, the right thing. Like he said, and in the right uniform. And I said, oh, but my idea of assertive was that. Although I think there was some probably truth to that, right? He was probably like, this chick is like really hardcore, right? She's going straight into the jugular. But he didn't say that, right? And when he said it to me, I was like, oh, yeah, I guess. And I always tell people have told me throughout the years, Destiny, you really know how to ask really good pointed questions. And I feel like that's a really good way of saying you know how to assert yourself and ask when the time is right in the right place, right? So I think just seeing it in that way, like, do you know how to ask the right questions? Do you know how to ask the right things? Do you know how to communicate with others whenever the time presents itself, right? So self-advocacy can be just really a lot of that, and not the very, very generic definition of like assert oneself, please. Yes, do it. Like, like it's more to that.
So how could you did mention your like the empower that you taught and a few other things that you said. So if we have listeners, and if there's one thing that they could implement right after listening to this podcast for them to either practice that assertiveness or to start making moves to self-advocacy, what is that one thing that they could start doing like right now?
The first thing, besides all those things you said, because those are things they can do, like own your strengths and weaknesses, right? So like people always ask me like about my success. They're like, how do you seem like you like know how to do everything all the time really well. I said, no, I just really know my strengths and all my weaknesses. I know people that can help me with that, or like I know a resource, right? It's like I'm just really good at like understanding my true strengths and knowing when I just need to sit down and step back and shut up, right? So I think if you own that, especially as a woman, but if anybody owns that, your confidence is, better, your self-assurance is better. And whenever those things are better, people around you tend to like kind of gravitate almost like magnet to you, right? Because they feel secure with you or by you, or like by what you're asking or by what you're requesting. And so those things, right, like just knowing those things and owning them is so powerful. And then once again, like practice, express yourself, make your goals clear. There's nothing sometimes more frustrating for a person, or like even for oneself, whenever somebody asks you what you want and you say, I don't know. Because you at least know what you don't want. And so sometimes I tell people, when you don't know what you want, you know what you don't want, and be verbal about that. So starting sometimes backwards is really helpful in like talking, but you always know what you want. You just might not know how to express it. So express it through the opposite way. Like, I know I don't want an environment that's going to, take all, where I have to work 10 hours a day, or I don't want an environment like, so start there. And then now let's just go out, mirror it. Then that means I want an environment that's flexible, so like, like that's a good place to start, and start asserting yourself, and start communicating what you want and being very clear with yourself and others and your needs and wants and desires.
Yeah, that's a really good tip, the opposite thing, because there very much is a time where like almost always there's some question that somebody will ask you and you're just like, I don't whatever, I don't know. But yeah, looking at that from the opposite direction, knowing what you don't want and going from there is a great pointer. I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of people. So with the mental health, self-advocacy in the workplace and mental health, how's that all connected?
Yeah. So I'm going to kind of like approach this through like an IO psychology lens, right? Let's like so for example, IO psychology and mental health are connected in a few different ways. IO psychologists study and apply principles of psychology to the workplace with the goal of improving organizational effectiveness and employee well-being. Well, where does mental health fall? Employee well-being, right? Like if mental health has become, more talked about and more discussed, but the truth is mental health has always existed since humanity has existed, right? And so it's not this new concept. It's just that it's becoming a little bit more accepted in daily conversation, and also in recognition of those things, right? Even in the military, it's becoming more accepted, but there's still implications to talking about it because people have misconceptions about what it means. And so since it's an important, aspect of employee well-being, there's a couple of ways that like our field can like kind of help with it. So we talk about the physical and mental health. We can help with mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, stress, which can impact, an employee's well-being. And then if that is impacting their employee well-being, well, guess what? It's also impacting your organization's bottom line, right? Like it's impacting their productivity, their performance, maybe like the way that their conflict resolution, maybe their negotiation skills. So all of those things, if an employee is suffering in your work environment, you're going to feel it. Right. And it might just be from an energy focus, right? You can usually feel when somebody is going through some sort of struggle. So that's one of the ways. It can also impact organizational culture. Culture's become a really big topic these days, right? Like you hear it everywhere, and you hear people talk about like, I want to work in a culture that is, this or that. In fact, there was I don't know exactly the research study, but I keep hearing it. So somebody can come and tell me where they, know it's from. But basically, one of the most important factors for service members who are transitioning is organizational culture, which is interesting because you can't really define culture. Culture is kind of a feeling. It's like the way that you feel and mesh in an organization. And so, but mental health has a lot to do with that. So IO psychologists, we can work with organizations to create a supportive and inclusive culture that promotes mental health and well-being. And then job design, right? If your job is not designed for what you know or what you do, it can affect employee mental health too. We can work with organizations to design jobs that minimize stress and promote well-being. So there's a lot of different ways that, from my field in particular, where mental health meets workplace, and also how it impacts the veteran community, because as we know, whenever you leave, one of the biggest deals for, service members who are leaving is to find something that fits for them. What's their next job? What's their next career? What's their next plan? And if they don't have those things in order, their mental health suffers tremendously, right? They feel powerless sometimes. They feel like they're not, ready. They don't feel confident. Their self-assurance, like I always say, it's like the deflatedness of everything. You feel cognitively, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually deflated, and think about how that impacts your mental health. It absolutely does, and then therefore, like everybody around you feels it too, your family, your friends. And so it's really important to understand what this means and like how this all feeds together. And all of that can be better through self-advocacy, through speaking up, maybe part of that is asking for help when you need it. And are recognizing your triggers and what's kind of like, that's another big part of self-advocacy, like knowing what triggers you and knowing what to do with it when it does trigger you, because there will be times where, people will say or do something and you're like, oh my gosh. And like, you just want to go off the handle for whatever reason, but knowing how to like, calm that nerve down is so incredibly important. And can that absolutely impact you in the workplace? Yes. I mean, how many things are we seeing in the media these days where people are talking and doing all kinds of crazy things in the work environment? Like, there's a lot going on out there. So that's how all of this is interconnected.
Would you say that by employers offering like emotional intelligence courses and workshops and things like that, is that something that an employer can do to help increase self-advocacy within the workplace?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I think like, for example, there's one of the ways that we talk a lot about impacting organizations in our field is through like management, right? Like managers, because they're the ones who like have the direct connection up and down the chain and across, right? They work together in most cases. They usually have like a set of employees that, communicates to them. And they're usually like the message bearer between the top and the bottom, right? So having different kinds of opportunities for them to be informed and educated and empowered with different strategies is really important. So for example, mental health awareness training, like just like in the military, we do lots of awareness training, right? We usually like check the block, check. But the truth is like awareness training is really important because it really just showcases that the communication or like that conversation can be had, period, right? Or that this is an accepted idea of what potentials could occur, period. So like really important to have these even just awareness type of trainings. You can also have training on, we talked about a little bit earlier, like mental health accommodations potentially, right? So like what kinds of can cover topics like how to identify potential accommodations, how to have conversations with employees about their mental health needs, and how to implement accommodations in the workplace. Some organizations, they'll get accommodation requests and have no idea how to implement. And so it's important to kind of have those conversations with your managers or with your leaders who might be seeing these things. And there are people out there that can help with that. Also, resilience. Resilience is extremely connected to mental health, self-advocacy. This training can cover topics such as mindfulness, cognitive behavioral techniques, stress management techniques. So all of these things. So there's things that you can absolutely do from an employee level, from a management level, from a senior leader level on how to kind of, like talk about these things, put these things out in the open and empower your employees through different, learning opportunities, through different strategy techniques and things like that. Like basically look at this as a set of tools that you can give to your employees and your managers that can empower them to make decisions or to stand up for themselves or to work together and collaborate because everybody feels empowered to like talk about what they need and what they, what they want. And it gives people an opportunity to really voice and be heard. So I think there's so many ways to do this and it can be different for every organization, but no matter the size of your organization, there are things and strategies and trainings that you can absolutely do.
Great. I love that you're providing examples that employers can relate to. I mean, like, here's something that happens, here's something you can do. There's a lot of times where people are having conversations about, yeah, there's so many things out there that you can do to make your workplace a better culture or to improve morale within the workplace, but then they don't provide any examples. And for somebody who might be new to the mental health space or to trying to improve their workplace, having some examples is a really good starting point, gives them some ideas on where they can start or maybe get more information. So I know you have several things that you do. And I know it sounds like through We2AreVets, you work more on the individual level, but then there's also an opportunity where employers can work with you. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So We2AreVets is, lately, to be very honest, I've been focused a lot on we're actually building a self-advocacy micro-credential. So one of the things we've been doing is researching different behaviors that one engages in if they are going to be a self-advocate. And so we're starting like at the very basics. So these are the behaviors. And then so we're going to do is teach people, how to do those behaviors. And then we're also going to ask them to demonstrate those behaviors. So in the future, there will be a learning micro-credential for self-advocacy that will be sponsored and created by We2AreVets. And though our main focus first will be on women veterans, the idea is to open it to all at some point. So I'm really excited about that. But as far as organizations working with me, absolutely through, different ways. One of the best ways to work with me potentially is as I have an organization, a consulting. I do a lot of consulting with organizations in various forums in various ways. I've done studies. I've done, I've worked like right now I work with an organization on helping them target and market their certification program to the military community. I've helped organizations create affiliation and affinity and resource groups, mentorship groups in their organization that are focused on, veterans. So there are so many ways. And then I also am a partner in an organization called CBOC, which is the Society of Evidence-Based Organizational Consulting. And that's a big mouthful for saying that basically we're an organization building community and belongingness in our field of IO psychology. And we have access to a lot of very specific credentialed and non-credentialed experts that can also help. So depending on what you're looking for, we can come up with an intervention or an opportunity for your organization to do whatever it is that you're looking for to make an impact in your workplace, right, on your humans. So the difference between our field is we focus on the behaviors of the employees in the workplace. So yes, there's lots of opportunity if you're looking for, specialized person to come in and help. Definitely feel free to reach out.
Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would like the listeners to know?
I thought that I wanted to read one statistic because I wanted people to realize just how big of a challenge this is. So according to the World Health Organization, depression and anxiety alone cost the global economy an estimated 1 trillion per year in lost productivity. In the United States, it is estimated that mental illness costs employers $200 billion per year in absenteeism and lost productivity. So if you don't think that this is impacting your workplace, you might want to look a little bit closer, because it's very likely that there's, and just by the nature of what our world is going through, like if you're turning on your TV at all, if you're looking at social media at all, those things that are going on out there absolutely impact regular people's mental health, people that have, any, and definitely any kind of disadvantaged populations as well, their mental health, very much so. It's hard to kind of get away from it. So it's really important to just recognize that this exists and stop, making it feel or like appear or like any of that as like an icky term or an icky situation, because the truth is, like, we all have challenges, in between these ears at any given point. And so it's important to just recognize that and talk about it and make it more accepted to talk about, because if people feel more comfortable, then it creates loyalty in the workplace. It creates energy and synergy, and all of these things are really valuable and also really result in high productivity. So, if you're looking from a bottom line, there's your bottom line.
That was a large number.
This is like really, I know you're just like, just threw it out there, like, yeah, just like $1 trillion, whatever. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Right. And when you think about it, you wouldn't think that the effect is that grand.
Yes.
Like
exactly.
Just on a day-to-day small business scale, or even like a large business who maybe the employer, the managers might be far removed from the people who are doing the work. It puts it quite into perspective to hear, like, this is what the statistic is. This is nationwide. Everybody is dealing with this in some way or form.
Yes, exactly. And like I said, it's impacting everybody. Even people who haven't gone through traumatic experiences might actually be feeling like trauma and some of those related potential mental health implications from just viewing and reading and being completely like, you know, in their own bubble with it, right? By, you know, if you're looking at the TV and you're on your phone, you're scrolling and you're reading and all that, it's a lot of negative stuff coming in. So it's going to impact the way that maybe you see the world, and maybe the way that you interact with the world, and maybe the way that you communicate the world to your children. So think about that, right? And that's where, at the end of the day, like, especially for our field, my field of IO psychology, we want to make the world a better place, and we want to make, you know, we want to impact to the workplace so that the future, you know, of our workplace is healthy for our children too. So that's how I see this. If we can talk more about it. Our younger generation, I definitely believe they are a lot more self-advocate, like self-advocacy promoters than we ever were, just by nature of like the generation, right? But because they will tell you what you want. My kids straight up tell me like what they want and what they don't want. And I think a lot of younger people are doing that, which is good, but that doesn't mean that they're not suffering through mental health challenges either. So we have to be good about listening to what they're saying, maybe even between the lines, right? So just being really conscious of those things and understanding.
With the younger generation, I do agree that they have shown themselves to be much more of a self-advocate than previous generations, but they're still working with older generations who may not receive that ask, right? So like you might be doing the self-advocacy and you might be asking for what you want, but maybe you're not asking in a way that it could be received. So so I find that really important to be like, it's great to ask for the things, but also keeping in mind that the person who you're asking needs to be able to receive them. So if you ask in one way and it's not getting received, try asking a different way. And I guess that's something that you would go over in one of your or in your courses where you're teaching people how to be self-advocates, right? The correct way to ask for what you need in a way that can be received.
Absolutely. And in fact, there is even like a word for some of that communication in the workplace, and it's called inclusive communication. And it's true. It's about really understanding like that intergenerational type of identity that is your organization, right? Because you're right. You're working with young people, older people, middle-aged. You're working with different generational differences. And at the end of the day, we all kind of want the same, like overarching, like humans want the same kinds of things, right? Like we want shelter and water and, you know, money and all, right? Like we want all those common core basic things together collaboratively. And so these kinds of communication strategies can get you all on the same page about the core of what you want. Just talking about how to, like you said, relate it in a way that is understandable to this, you know, to the person that you're sending the communication to, right? So it's interesting. All these like really complex concepts are coming out, you know, these days. But at the core and the foundation, we're going back to the basics, like communication and resiliency. Like we're building the foundations of just being a human and operating in human, like, you know, situations. But the truth is because we are across so many generations and so many things have happened, that we have to get real about understanding how to communicate to each other. So yes, at the end of the day, self-advocacy is just truly about communicating. It's like,
hey, sometimes getting back to the basics is the best thing to do.
It really is, you know? So, and that's why I love my field, because we deal in the basics and we also deal in the trends. So it's like, there will always be work for us no matter where we go. So
great. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
If you have a topic you'd like to discuss, drop it in the comments below. Thanks for listening and growing with us in For Business, where we discuss all things business.
You